I'm Mark Datysgeld. This is my colleague Ilona Stadnik. We represent respectively Brazil and Russia, and what we thought we'd do is make just a very small presentation with some comparison points between our countries as it concerns digital technology and the internet. So to get started, we're going to discuss a little bit about cybercrime. And may I open the discussion? Yes. So, one thing that strikes me as particular in Brazil is that we have a big market for card fraud and bank operations. I actually read an article on Quartz that said Brazil has the best hackers in the world for that, so people hire them from outside. When they're assembling gangs to do cybercrime, they go, okay, let's hire a Brazilian to do our banking operation. Which, I mean, it is endearing in some way, but at the same time, it's not ideal, right?
Also, Russian hackers are also very famous for their card operations, you know? Maybe we just share the markets of hackering.
It could be just a competition, and what
They don't overlapping, they just share their markets.
split, yeah. And what when I think about that is so many people with potential being wasted. Because if they're good enough to do that, they would probably be good enough to do a lot of other things, wouldn't they? And that's the sort of thought that makes me think that a lot of the problem with developing countries, particularly the BRICS, is not lack of talent or even investment, it's lack of focus. It's a lack of actually being able to take that creativity, that ingenuity, and driving it somewhere. So would be really curious to know what is the situation in Russia like as it concerns cybercrime.
You know that in Russia, cybercrime is kind of another topic, another field for regulation. And of course, we have these problems with card operations, with different cyber attacks on financial sector, but they are tackled actually in private. So we have a lot of firms that's acting on the security of financial sector, of banks, of companies. So still, it is not regulated on the governmental level. It is not like fixed in the criminal code of Russia. And since the last year, there were some consultations, and I'm really proud to say that they kind of multi-stakeholder even, because a lot of experts from our specialized agency, it's Russian Association for Telecommunications, they took part in the discussions of how to embed these cyber criminals into the criminal law of Russia. Also, our very big bank, Sberbank, also participated in these discussions together with our main company for cyber investigation group IB. They were also experts. So we have this technical community, the financial sector, the some kind of civil society, the representations from the other private sectors, and the governmental representatives, actually, those who will make it. But still, the consultations are ongoing, so we still have no some kind of amendments to the criminal law that will be tackling these issues of cybercrime operations. But still, the problem should to be somehow sorted out.
That is very interesting, especially considering that Russia does have a big player in cybersecurity that is a worldwide player, which is Kaspersky Systems. And we did see the US making a big fuss about that company, but it's actually very well respected. In the sense that in Brazil, we do use Kaspersky software to do our security. So if you could comment on that.
Actually, the story with Kaspersky is quite politicized, and you know that in Russia there is a trend for substituting the foreign software, the foreign solutions for governmental networks for our national ones. So there is a special national program for substitution. And you know that it was a part of sanctions from the Russian side to the part of the United States. So we prohibited their solutions in the governmental networks for security. It was part of the sanction. And there was the similar step from the United States to prohibit Kaspersky on their networks. That's why. Because before that, there were no questions whether they really have some backdoors or other stuff. And after that, they started these hearings in Congress, and the head of the CEO of Kaspersky, the Eugene Kaspersky, were giving a testimony about his products. And they are now prohibited. So it's kind of a political history, politicized history. So don't worry about using Kaspersky in Brazil.
I will feel free to use. It is very good software. It's very high quality software, and the matter does seem very politicized, which is an issue that we get into again and again when it comes to often when the BRICS tries to get into these markets. This sort of thing ends up happening. It did happen with China as well for Huawei, and it happens with all sorts of players. So just moving on a little bit, but staying in the subject, I wonder about regulation, because Brazil is very well known for having a Bill of Rights for the Internet, the Marco Civil, which was in many ways an accomplishment. It did establish a lot of interesting rules, but at the same time, it is a little bit too elevated. It did bring interesting solutions, but it's all the time under attack. It's a very vulnerable resolution that Congress people often try to attack. It was left without proper safeguards, and it does inform a lot of decisions, which is good, but we do feel that it is constantly under threat, that there is something that we need to protect. So while on one hand we have this interesting political device that grants us a certain degree of, policy oriented towards protecting consumers and businesses and preventing abuse, but on the other hand, it is constantly in doubt. So it does feel a bit like a win that is not that much of a win. It is, but it feels unbalanced. So I would like to know a little bit about how the situation of regulation and the lawmaking in general is in Russia towards the subject of the internet.
You know that in Russia we doesn't have such kind of a law like Marco Civil the Internet that you have in your country. And all the regulation that's happening last 5 years actually, it's like embodiment of different provisions to the existing law on communications, the existing law of telecommunications. So it's kind of like patching something that is outdated. And so you know that internet, if you will see Russian television or see the official newspapers, is somehow portrayed as a technology that brings not innovation or some kind of opportunities, but it's technology that brings potential harm for society and personal security. And actually, if you will read the recently published doctrine on informational security, we have this division on 3 layers. It's national security, information security, it's security of society, and it's personal security. So the approach is completely different from what we have in some European countries or in Brazil and other countries of the world. And a lot of regulation was in the field of actually security. So some kind of restrictions to prevent some harmful information, potentially harmful information from fleeing around the networks. And so there was the law on bloggers, that obliged people who have blogs with more than 3,000 subscribers to be registered as a mass media. Yeah, it's really. Another law was regarding the virtual private networks. It was like signed in November, just recently, and the main idea is that internet service providers should remove all the data about the means how to circumvent this blocking of sites with prohibited information. And so if they don't remove this information of how to circumvent it, they will be blocked too. And we have actually a special agency, Roskomnadzor in Russia, that keeps the list of prohibited sources, of prohibited websites, that contains the information on extremism, on different terrorism groups, so it is kind of prohibited, so you will not access it. But the problem here is that sometimes a lot of web resources may have some kind of contextual information that may be under these restrictions, but it is not, and they are also blocked. And there are a lot of different court mitigations of how to tackle this. So that's why this law is hardly debated and discussed and blamed for this, for prohibiting this freedom of information, freedom of access. Also, if we speak about technical parts of the internet, we have another law that is completely about critical information infrastructure in Russia. And you know that in China, they built from the beginning a very kind of hierarchical internet. But in Russia, the development was kind of messy. There were some academic networks, then there were some private enthusiasts who just make these internet connections. And a lot of traffic is going out to the country through the internet exchange points in the Europe. And now there is a trend in our regulation to cut all this trans-border traffic flow and make it circulating only inside the Russian borders. So it is not like this now, but the initiatives are going this way. So it's kind of making the infrastructure very independent from the other sources. So not so good trends, I would say, are happening in Russia still. And I think that there won't be any positive shifts, because you know that even in the opening session, Russian representatives also said that internet is not so secure as it is now. And we should some kind of make it more secure by duplicating the critical infrastructure. And you heard about this project of making the BRICS internet. It was actually a Russian proposal, but to trace back the history, it was the meeting of our Security Council, National Security Council, and they advised our foreign ministry to make a proposal to BRICS countries to make this separate internet. It was not called separate internet at the beginning. It was some kind of making our own domain system. So not to be dependent on the route that is authorized by IGF. But our experts say that if we trying to build this separate DNS system, that means that we are building separate internet, because we couldn't connect to the global network if we're using this kind of DNS, this kind of route. The route should be the one thing. Now the internet is distributed. And so maybe in Brazil there was some news about this. What is the reaction of your government or some expert communities on this initiative?
Yeah, something interesting when you were talking about this matter is that while we do have this bill of law that does enable some interesting things, at the same time, more than once, there have been laws for website takedowns due to offense to honor. Of course, the honor of politicians, don't get me wrong. And though these projects they have been stopped, but at the same time it wasn't one attempt. It has been a constant attempt to introduce laws that enable the takedown of websites and wipe them away from Brazilian internet at any cost if it, for example, offends the honor of a politician by, proclaiming or proving that they are involved in a corruption scheme, by supplying information about their overseas accounts. That's clearly defamatory, so it should be taken down off the internet. And though it hasn't passed yet, it has come dangerously close to something like that happening. And when I think about a sectioning of the internet, like a cornering of the internet to isolate the BRICS from the US interests, from developed world interests, what I think is that it would be very easy for this kind of measure to pass had we a separate DNS system, had we a separate internet, even if it had some protocol that would eventually be developed to bridge the two networks, because that would happen. But I'm pretty sure that politicians would jump at that opportunity and just go like, okay, let's block this and this and this, let's do this and this and this. And so, while on the one hand, it seems to me that it carries some interest in terms of development, of maybe getting something cohesive going on between the BRICS countries, which is direly needed. We need a common thread, we need something to unite us better and to call our own, but at the same time, this does not seem to be the way to me, because unfortunately corruption is still very rampant. That is part of our struggle, and it could work, but under very different circumstances. What I worry though is that it will happen anyway, and it won't happen in an organized fashion, and maybe it will be only Russia and China, and that would be awful, because if you put together those two gigantic countries, it is a substantial part of humanity that is there, and even though it's very hard to access content in Russian and in Chinese, which are languages that I have only basic knowledge of, at the same time I do try whenever I can, whenever there's some news concerning Russia and I'm reading it in English. Yeah, I can try to Google translate something from a Russian source and see if does this really match? What is the impression? And the idea that us researchers would be cut off from being able to do that, it seems very frightening in terms of what could go. So the prospect of just Russia and China breaking off seems even worse to me. And yeah, it is a possibility, isn't it? It is something that has root in reality, isn't it?
But am I right to understand that Brazil maybe should support this initiative? It is likely to support, no?
Not likely. Not likely under. I'm sure a lot of politicians will love it. I'm completely sure. But under the terms of democracy bill, it's impossible. They would have to dismantle democracy bill, which they are trying to do. Don't get me wrong, they are trying to do that. But under our current understanding of the internet, it is impossible. It would have to be dismantled. It would have to be taken apart so that it could be taken in that direction. So it's not a viable project in the sense that, as it has been proposed. If they were to come up with an idea, for instance, which I think would be much better and much healthier, if they were, okay, let's foster more interaction on the internet between Brazilian news sources and Russian news sources and Chinese. Let's build common platforms. Let's try to get maybe a common hosting ground, or something like that. That would be a good idea. That would be probably to the interest of the people. The DNS is more like a power play, which doesn't strike me as something that will bring us closer and help us bridge that gap that we still have left to really reach our potential. So It's just feels like another missed opportunity from this block that has been having many missed opportunities time after time after time, and never really engaging in a consistent policy. And technology is something that could come together. Brazil has great coders, technologists. Russia has great coders, technologists. China has this amazing set of technologists. India has been, people have been outsourcing code like crazy to India for so many years. And a solution that would somehow integrate that or would maybe elevate that, recognize that by the states would be something revolutionary for us. It could put us on the vanguard of technology. But when there is no political will, apparently there's a way.
But our country has a political will to do this. And maybe if in Brazil you can just kind of rally up for this and prevent it, because democracy is, I think, better in your country than in ours. But I'm afraid that if it comes that our government decides to make this cut off, nothing can stop it from it. It will just happen because of the imposition of these regulations, and that's it.
This does not bite very well for a country that should be trying to expand, especially when you consider that Russia is, much like Brazil, enormous, has different biomes, has climates that are not very hospitable where people actually live. We have this amazing forest that is very inhabited, but at the same time very hard to reach. And I am thinking that maybe Russia does have something like that, right? You do have a lot of frozen land and places that are distant, very distant, chill capitals. So, what is going on in terms of networking? And shouldn't we be focusing on that instead of sectioning off the internet?
If you speak about our territory, you know that in some areas of northern part and far eastern, there are some settlements that could be reached only by a helicopter. You know, only helicopter. There is no roads. So if there is no roads, so you can imagine what happens in terms of internet infrastructure. But we have a national program for developing information society in Russia, and it is now under implementation. The main aim of this program is to increase the level of penetration and the density of users in the far-reaching areas of our country. And there was a recent success. The project started in 2014. It was a very ambitious project to make the fiber cable, internet fiber cable, to regions like Sakhalin, like Kamchatka, like Magadan. So it's very, very, very on the north and very, very far east. Because previously there were only satellite connections that is very costly for citizens. So internet was not so accessible for the majority of the population. So it was used only on the need. And now it is almost ended, the project. And yesterday I was just looking at how it was occurring, because there is also a very good partnership between Russian, like the monopolist on the telecom market, it's Rostelecom, and it is also some kind of controlled by the Russian government because it is joint stock company. The company has a majority of the sharings, yeah. So the Rostelecom making this project together with Huawei because it's on the Chinese border, yeah. And the main component of this program was a special ship that make this fiber optic cable on the sea land. And this ship is from London, actually. And so this is a kind of great conversion to make this infrastructure project, to make the internet accessible for more people. And it is prognosed that by the end of this and the continued year, they will stop it, achieve the goal. And so several hundred of people are already using this. But the problem is that it is not simply the solution to put this cable. you should rearrange all the infrastructure on the land because it's very outdated. So a lot of resources and money should be taken from the national budget to these federal budgets. So actually, it is also a problem, but it is still somehow resolving. And it is like a positive government intervention into the internet access. And in Brazil, so how you tackle this issue with the forests, are there many settlements or cities like in this area?
This does prove something that I thought, that we have very similar struggles, because we had for a long time a national broadband plan that tried to connect the entirety of Brazil. But the interesting thing is, it's harder than it seems. And when you get to the northern zone, and we have very important cities, very relevant cities there, that might not have the biggest population, but that have a very important part of the population. And you get there, a lot of sometimes the systems, the actual hardware, doesn't work because it isn't fit for that biome. I was involved in a project once where exactly that happened. They put the routers, they were from Siemens in the region, and the routers just, not only they corroded, but they ceased working in months because they are not adapted to that kind of climate. And too humid and too much density of particles in the air, and concentration of different types of creatures. And often our problem sometimes ends up being animals. We do have a problem in the Northeast with, animals just biting off cables and cutting off connectivity. It is a complex arrangement. It is very true. And what they have been trying to do for the past few years, the military has been very focused on that, is getting the cables actually through the rivers of the region, because they started to seem much more logical than just like putting oversea, or like putting above or putting on the ground. It wasn't making a lot of sense because in the northern region, the ground, it pulls things down because it's very, it's very fickle, and over the air, the equipment doesn't work. So the military has been passing a lot of cables through the rivers, which has been working some effect, but unfortunately, we don't have a lot of access to the information. We know what's going on, and we do have friends from the northern region that tell us that yes, some work is being done, but at the same time, it's something that we wish was more universal. We had a project for a satellite that was supposed to be free and universal for the entirety of Brazil, but unfortunately, with budget cuts and changes in politicians and all of that, the project just got scraped, and we're back to a different square. And yeah, it's unfortunate that we don't have a lot of more time to discuss this, but I do think that this is a session that we should take forward, and we should propose it on a full panel, because very clearly we have a lot of information to exchange, and a lot of data could be traded, and we could think of interesting solutions based on having. So I do propose that we get this panel together again with the full BRICS members and make another attempt at giving this an honest go, because I do think that there is a very interesting discussion to be had here. So if you want to add some final thoughts, please.
Well, I actually miss our Chinese colleague. The thing is that this session was designed for full BRICS delegates. Now we are just discussing the B and R, Brazil and Russia. Actually, as I'm a researcher, I'm just making some research in the field of cybersecurity for Russia, for China. I really like this platform for dialogue, because you know that we discussed this. Some sources are not accessible because of the language issues, and I meet here some Chinese colleagues, some Chinese academicians, and I hopefully will maintain the contact with them because it's really hard to find out what is really going on because all we have is just the secondary information from secondary sources that someone somewhere told about this, and it's not always true. So I think that the next year we should probably make this panel happen. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Lona. You seem to have hit like the nail in the head. The problem with the BRICS is that we share very similar circumstances, but wildly different languages and wildly different character sets. And if we were to somehow get started on starting to bridge that, I think we could do a lot of progress. So thank you very much for joining me this year, and let's keep this project going.